Thank you. No further pretrial matters, Your Honor.
Okay. Terrific. With that, the bailiff can open court, please.
Hear ye, hear ye. The U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, is open to persuade to adjournment. All having businesses before this honorable court draw near, give attention, and you shall be heard.
At this time, I'm going to read the OCLRE implicit bias statement. Before we begin trial, I have a brief message to share with today's participants. We all have feelings, assumptions, perceptions, fears, and stereotypes about others. Some biases we are aware of and others we might not be fully aware of, which is why they are called implicit biases or unconscious biases. As participants in the Ohio Mock Trial program, it is important to resist jumping to conclusions or acting upon personal likes or dislikes. Resist letting bias, prejudice, or public opinion influence your behavior inside or outside of the courtroom. Treat all individuals with respect, regardless of ability, gender, race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, national origin, or socioeconomic status. And I will now ask if the bailiff will please swear in the witnesses. We're not supposed to do that until after opening statements, but I'm afraid we'll forget, as often happens. So let's do that now and have that out of the way before we begin with openings.
Will all witnesses and parties who are to give testimony in these proceedings please turn on your camera? Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and your testimony will comply with the rules of Ohio trial and competition? I do.
Yes.
Thank you very much, bailiff. Let's begin with the relator's opening statement, please.
May I proceed?
Please, yes.
Your Honors, Your Honor, I would like to begin by introducing myself and my team. My name is John Santos, and I'm here with my co-counsel, Braden McGuire, along with our timekeeper and bailiff, Haley Clark and Sophia G., and our witnesses, Hollis Fitzpatrick, played by Haley Connett, and Phoenix Anderson, played by Isabella Dobbins. And may it please the court. A taking is a taking, no matter how small. Today, we have a case brought before you about a previous business owner, Hollis Fitzpatrick. Hollis ran a local business. It was a family legacy called Fitzpatrick's Restaurant. Fitzpatrick's has been around since Hollis was a child. And before I go further, I would like to suggest that no matter what the respondents bring forth, this case is not about if Hollis was a lousy business owner or if the business was unprofessionally ran. No, Your Honors, today's hearing is about how Hollis was left with nothing and his family legacy stripped away from her. Today's hearing is about how Governor DeBeer discriminated against Hollis's business. Today's hearing is about how Hollis did not receive any compensation. Today, Your Honors, it is up to the realtor to prove that there is a taking through three prongs. One, that COVID regulation imposed by the state of Buckeye caused substantial and irrecoverable economic ramifications to Fitzpatrick's. Two, Buckeye's regulation destroyed Fitzpatrick's investment-backed expectations and financial commitments. And three, the state of Buckeye discriminated against Fitzpatrick's. Your Honors, it is up to me, my co-counsel, to prove these three prongs today. Otherwise, we must presume the opposite to be true. Firstly, Hollis Fitzpatrick. She was the business owner who was driven to shut down her business on December 12, 2020. She will testify that she was discriminated against and she was taken from and left with nothing. Other larger businesses got to open up, yet Hollis was left with the culpability of destroying her family legacy. But Your Honors, she will not be the only instance of loss you hear about today. You see, Your Honors, Hollis received nothing in return for the partial taking. As it says in Lucas versus South Carolina Coastal Council, deprived of the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution, when a regulation, such as COVID regulations, deprive property of all economical beneficial use, the takings clause requires the government to compensate the owner of the value that was lost. Yet, the state of Buckeye has yet to do so, and there's no evidence showing that they have the drive to exact such compensation. Now, Phoenix Anderson, an expert in the field of financial management, will walk us through proving that there was a net loss and a loss of investment-backed expectations after the state of Buckeye implemented their regulations. But first, she will prove that although Fitzpatrick may have run under a slow net gain, it was reasonable to get improvements, only expecting a continuous net gain. She will present the statistics and show prior pandemic, Fitzpatrick was operating at a net gain, and during the pandemic, she was operating at a net loss. Your Honors, witness by witness, step by step, we will reveal that this case was a partial taking, and Hollis has yet to receive compensation, and the state has no intention of doing so. So that's why, at the end of today's hearing, Your Honors, me and my co-counsel will respectfully request that Your Honors grant this to be a partial taking and grant Hollis the compensation she rightfully deserves.
Thank you, Mr. Santos. Opening statement from respondent, please.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Please, yes.
Judge Carter and Judge Brantquire, may it please the court. In 2020, the COVID-19 virus rocked the world and affected everyone's lives. In one case, the case of Hollis Fitzpatrick, she sought to use the government's response to the pandemic as justification for why her business failed. She is now suing my clients, Governor Fran DeBeer and Director of Health, Dr. Ellis Mazakis, for a writ of mandamus. When Miss Fitzpatrick's parents were ready to retire, she took over the family restaurants, Fitzpatrick's, but she had little success in running the business. She was cited for numerous health code violations, operated on slim profit margins, and even filed for bankruptcy. Then, in March of 2020, with the outbreak of COVID-19, the state of Buckeye's government responded to the pandemic with regulations to help protect its citizens. One of the temporary regulations included a 2-month closure of all bars, restaurants, salons, and barbershops. Miss Fitzpatrick is blaming the government's regulations for causing her business to fail, when in reality, her own bad business practices and unwillingness to adapt to the circumstances caused her business to close. Now she is invoking the Fifth Amendment's taking clause for partial regulatory taking that did not occur. In Penn Central Transportation Company v. the City of New York, the court considers 3 factors to determine whether a partial regulatory taking has occurred: the economic impact of the regulations on the claimant, the extent to which the regulations interfered with investment-backed expectations, and the character of governmental action regarding the regulations. The relators bear the burden of proof and must prove by a preponderance of the evidence that a partial regulatory taking has occurred. Although we respondents do not bear the burden, it will be made clear after our testimony that a partial regulatory taking has not occurred. We will call 2 witnesses, Aspen Bennett, former employee of Fitzpatrick's, and Dr. Ellis Mazakis, the Buckeye Director of Health and Human Services. Let's discuss the Penn Central factors and the evidence we will introduce. In considering the economic impact of the regulations on the restaurant, they were not sufficiently severe to constitute a taking. You will hear from Aspen Bennett, who will testify that Fitzpatrick's was struggling prior to the pandemic regulations. She will explain how payday was always very stressful because she was never sure if she was going to get paid since the company was not making a lot of money. And Ms. Fitzpatrick habitually paid her employees late. As for the interference with investment-backed expectations, there were none. Dr. Ellis Mazakis will explain how the food code is updated every 4 years to continuously provide the best industry practices to keep restaurant goers safe, and that the restaurants are highly regulated under the health code. In considering the character of governmental action, the court looks to see if the business has been impermissibly singled out by the government for an unfavorable treatment, if the regulation served a harm-preventing purpose, and the accompaniment of regulatory delay. Dr. Ellis Mazakis will explain how the regulations apply to all restaurants, not just Fitzpatrick's, and that they serve the purpose to protect the Buckeye citizens from the pandemic. She will also testify that after only 2 months, restaurants were allowed to reopen when delays of 45 months and longer have been deemed permissible. COVID-19 changed the world, and the government had to respond in order to protect its citizens. Therefore, we respectfully request that the court deny the relator's demand for a writ of mandamus with prejudice. Thank you.
Nice timing. Thank you, Ms. Papakirk. Would a relator like to call their first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. We will call Hollis Fitzpatrick to the stand. May I proceed?
Yes, go right ahead.
Can you state your name for the court?
I am Hollis Fitzpatrick, the previous business owner of Fitzpatrick's Restaurant.
And what do you do for a living?
Well, currently nothing due to De Beer and the government, but previously I owned and operated Fitzpatrick's Restaurant, my family legacy, and now I have nothing.
Can you elaborate?
When COVID hit, De Beer had closed down all restaurants. Before COVID, I was slowly making progress. Now, nothing. De Beer allowed other places to be open, and some to even be exempted from certain restrictions.
How long have you had the restaurant in your family?
For as long as I can remember. My grandparents had opened it a long time ago.
And how was the restaurant managed?
I manage things pretty well in my opinion. I've ran it for almost 2 decades. People think my DIY projects aren't very professional, but they got the job done right and did not harm my customers.
Have you ever faced any type of economic downfall before?
I did, the Great Recession of 2008, but I was able to recover until COVID-19 pandemic, which would again create financial struggle.
And do you believe that the COVID regulations led to the closing and failing of your restaurant?
Absolutely. If it wasn't for the COVID regulations, closing at 6 p.m., operating at 1/3 capacity, being unable to use all of my investments I had made, and the discrimination I faced, I would have a steady, normal profit, and my business would still be afloat. I was simply just taken from.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like to screen share evidence. Evidence.
Sorry about that. I muted myself for a second. Can you repeat the exhibit number?
Excuse me, what did you say?
Can you repeat the exhibit number? Does it have an exhibit number on it? Okay, great. Responder, are you be able to see it?
Not yet.
I don't think that's right. Applications maybe? There. Just over, yeah. Share and then go to your tab.
Is it sharing?
It appears so.
I cannot read that, Johnny.
Do you know what this is?
Yes, that is a transcript of Governor De Beer's letter that he had sent out whenever he was saying that COVID regulations and exemptions were going to be a thing.
Can you go into a little more detail about that?
He talks about how large spaces were able to open back up, and people that were his friends had bigger businesses, so they were going to be able to open back up.
And does it talk about anything to do with a movie set?
He does not in this one.
When did you apply for your exemptions?
I ended up applying for an exemption on June 3rd.
Were you aware of any other businesses applying for exemptions?
There was previously a movie set that had previously applied for an exemption and they got approved.
And how many days after the stay-at-home order were the movie set approved for the exemption?
Only 4 days. They got approved for their exemption March 15th or March 19th.
And
Objection,
just
Your Honor.
reiterate,
Relevance. I do not see how a movie set is relevant to Fitzpatrick's Restaurant.
Have a response, Mr. Santos?
According to Rule 4.1, this makes our line of questioning more probable to show that there was discrimination in Fitzpatrick's case, and it will help with the line of questioning prove 1 out of the 3 prongs in our case.
I think it's okay, Ms. Papakirk. I'm going to overrule the objection for now.
Thank you, Your
Thank
Honor.
you. I'm going to restate that question. Just to reiterate, when did you ask for the exemption and when did the movie set receive theirs?
I asked for an exemption on June 3rd and the movie set got to have an exemption on March 19th.
Yet the health department told me there was no exemption process.
So you believe that because you're a small business that you were discriminated against?
Yes, not just that I was a small business, but I was not friends with DeBeer. He allowed movie filming to stay running and pushed me off. He even allowed other bigger businesses to open and ignore the restrictions.
Now, I would like to ask you a little bit about your investments. Did you feel that your investments you made were needed?
I had been drawing in new groups of people, and I've been making profit. And my accountant Phoenix Anderson had advised me, after looking at some of my profit trends, that investing would allow Fitzpatrick's to begin making even more profit.
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for hearsay.
The witness has testified and her answer's on the record. Do you want to strike it? I don't, what was your question, Mr. Santos? Put your question just to me and not the witness.
The question was, did you feel that your investments that you made were needed?
Anything else, Ms. Papakirk? I'm not quite sure. I understand the nature of the objection. I'm just not sure I understand the basis for that particular answer from the witness.
I move to strike the testimony as the witness explained how Phoenix advised her on certain information, and that goes to the truth of the matter of the importance of her investments.
I'm going to overrule it. I understand it, and thank you for pointing that out. If you're welcome to raise that objection again if the witness is testifying as to any statements by third parties that aren't in court to be cross-examined. Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you, Your
Santos.
Honor.
Thank you. Could you have adapted to the governor's reopening thing easily?
No, my pinball machines were too close together, and my tables and chairs were bolted to the floor.
And moving on, so to our understanding, you lost your restaurant due to the financial crisis you were in. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I was just so down in the rut. The operating during COVID only turned me a $15 profit at the end of the day. This was not even enough to continue to pay my employees.
So what happened next? How did you pay your employees?
I ended up taking out 2 personal protection loans. I was attempting to make some of the money back that I had to pay for my bills and to pay the employees.
And how was profit during the Governor DeBeer stay-at-home order?
Bad. I was making no profit for over 6 weeks, and the governor just kept extending the stay-at-home order, even after he said he was going to release it.
So when DeBeer did lower the stay-at-home order, how were things then?
Things were still so downhill. We just had to close.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-exam of Ms. Fitzpatrick.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Ms. Fitzpatrick. How are you?
I'm good.
I'd just like to talk about your restaurant pre-COVID. Fitzpatrick's restaurant has been in your family for a long time, as you said on direct, correct?
Correct.
You inherited the restaurant from your parents, didn't you?
Yes.
Traditionally, your family, including yourself, has always kept food prices at the restaurant low, right?
Right.
So profit margins could be slim, couldn't they?
Yes, we like to keep things very traditional.
In order to save money, you have always been a do-it-yourself kind of person,
Objection,
right?
Your Honor, relevance.
May I respond?
Yes, go ahead.
One of the prongs in the Penn Central is the economic impact. So I am discussing Fitzpatrick's financial viability prior to the pandemic regulations.
I think it's okay. I'm going to overrule the objection. I believe the witness testified along these similar lines in her direct. So go ahead, Ms. Papakirk.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Would you like me to restate the question?
Yes.
So profit margins at the restaurant could be slim, couldn't they?
Yes.
In order to save money, you have always been a do-it-yourself kind of person, right?
Yeah.
One of the projects you did was the restaurant's plumbing, didn't you?
Yes.
But the health code was not very pleased with this project, were they? Or the health department, excuse me.
They were not. I mean, they came in and they were picking up things to code me on because my restaurant was so clean.
They issued you a citation for the plumbing, correct?
Correct.
So you could say that restaurants are heavily regulated under the health code, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Now, I would like to shift over to talking about your restaurant during the COVID regulations. When you first heard of COVID-19, people didn't know things other than it was a virus easily transmittable through close proximity and touch, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of personal knowledge.
Overruled. I think the witness can testify as to her general knowledge about the scope of or the risk of the pandemic.
Thank you.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes.
When you first heard of COVID-19, all you knew was that it was easily transmittable through close proximity and touch, correct?
Correct.
It was a scary time, wasn't it?
You could say that.
People were dying from the virus, weren't they?
I'm unsure of that.
You care about the health and safety of your customers, don't you?
I do.
So you wouldn't want them to contract COVID from coming to your restaurant, right?
Correct.
In the spring of 2020, the government issued COVID regulations for the public safety, right?
Right.
All over Buckeye, people were protesting these regulations, correct?
Correct.
So you could say that other businesses were affected by the regulations, weren't they?
Well, I'd say everybody was affected by them.
So you were not the only restaurant affected.
Right, but bigger businesses still got to open up, and even 4 days after Governor DeBeer had issued a stay-at-home order, he let a movie set run.
Moving on, to adjust to these regulations, you hired a high school student to design a website, didn't you?
We were going to try it out, yeah.
The website didn't work, did it?
No,
It kept generating errors, right?
right,
So you abandoned the idea of a website altogether, true?
true,
You never tried to do another website?
no,
You also never utilized any food delivery services, correct?
Phoenix Anderson had advised me, and we were going to try, but it was too late.
But you never utilized them, correct?
Correct.
On June 3rd, you requested a hearing to get exempted from the regulations, right?
I did, and they told me there wasn't any.
Then when the application process finally opened, you applied for an exemption, true?
Yes,
When the health department got back to you, they requested additional information, correct?
correct. It was simply way too late to even put more information out there to try to have my restaurant open by the time that they reached back out to me.
Would you be able to identify this letter from the health department?
Yeah.
Your Honor, at this point in time, I would like to present the witness with a copy of Exhibit G. Let the record reflect I'm showing opposing counsel a clean and unmarked copy.
So noted. Thank you.
I apologize. Oops. Do you recognize this document, Ms. Fitzpatrick?
I do.
Can you please follow along as I read it?
Yeah.
Your application seeking exemptions from the state mandated COVID-19 safety protocols has been received. Application status is pending. Please provide additional information outlining your reason for seeking exemptions. Include all relevant information related to the ventilation, airflow, or other infrastructure that would allow your business to safely operate without the state mandated safety protocols. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
So the government specified what type of follow-up information they needed from you, correct?
Correct, but I didn't receive this until December 9th, and by then it was just too late.
You still never gave them follow-up information though, yes or no?
That's correct.
So we have discussed your restaurant pre and post-COVID regulations, correct?
Correct.
And the one difference that you are complaining about is the government regulations, right?
Right, but not necessarily because of the regulations, but that he allowed the other businesses to ignore the regulations.
These were the same regulations that were put in place to protect the public, correct?
Correct, but he allowed other businesses to ignore them.
But they were to protect the public, weren't they?
They were.
And they apply to all restaurants, correct?
They were supposed to, yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. Redirect, Mr. Santos.
Oh, shoot.
Yes, Your Honor. So let me reiterate. Pre-COVID, were you still making money?
Yes.
And what was your rating? What was the Hell Code rating that you had on your restaurant?
I received a B minus. They were just nitpicking at all the things that they could cite me on.
And is that a passing grade?
That is a passing grade.
So the health code was in your favor, so that you still were able to run and operate business.
That is correct.
What happened the first time you asked for your exemptions again?
They denied me.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any recross, Ms. Papakirk?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Fitzpatrick, would you recognize the citations that the Health Department gave to you?
I would.
Your Honor, at this point in time, I would like to share a copy of Exhibit A. Let the record reflect I am presenting opposing counsel with a clean and unmarked copy.
That's fine.
Ms. Fitzpatrick, do you recognize this?
I do.
Please follow along as I read. I'm going to start about 2 sentences in where it says all. All 12 violations are willful, which is the most severe of the 4 types of violation designations. A willful violation is defined as a violation in which the employer either knowingly failed to comply with a legal requirement, purposeful disregard, or acted with plain indifference to employee safety. Did I read that correctly?
You did.
So your restaurant had willful violations, correct?
Correct.
I would also like to point our attention to part 4 of the exhibit. I'm going to read the bottom right-hand corner. Plumbing pipes creating overflow and draining dirty water into sink where produce and salad are prepped, which could cause an unsanitary environment. Did I read that correctly?
Oh, you did. It was just it was just a fault on my end.
But that still could hurt the safety of your customers, couldn't it?
It could have.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Fitzpatrick. You may step down. And relator, do you have additional witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to call to the stand Phoenix Anderson.
Very good.
Can you say your name for the court?
Phoenix Anderson.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I worked for Fountainhead Fund for a few years before I certified public accounting or CPA license. And after I received my license, I acquired a job at a regional firm called Rain and Associates, and I worked there full time until I started at Fitzpatrick's.
How long have you worked at Fitzpatrick's?
I've handled the books for Fitzpatrick's for over 10 years.
Can you tell us about your schooling?
I attended Wolverine State University, where I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Financial Management in 2002.
Can you tell us about any other qualifications?
Yes, I received my Certified Public Accountant license in 2007.
At this time, Your Honor, I'd like to establish Phoenix Anderson as an expert in certified public accounting.
Respondent, do you have anything to say?
No objections, as long as they stay within the scope of their expertise.
Understood. Thank you, Ms. Barucha. You may go ahead, Mr. McGuire.
Thank you. Can you tell us about Fitzpatrick's state as a business when you started?
When I started at Fitzpatrick's, Hollis had mentioned his restaurant had seen better days. Hollis talked to me and expressed some concerns for their financial stability. I ended up taking over all of Fitzpatrick's books and completely devoted myself to learning the business inside and out. I did a great job balancing my personal life and my work life.
What do you mean by balancing your work and personal life?
When I started at Fitzpatrick's, I met her cousin, which I ended up marrying.
Has this relationship ever affected your work?
Oh, no, not at all. I take my work very seriously, and I believe that this relationship had no impact on my work there.
Did you and Hollis ever argue about certain aspects of the business?
Yes, but not because we were family. He was really headstrong when it came to making changes. We didn't see
What were some options Fitzpatrick's considered to grow?
We explored businesses that could utilize their existing space, such as a gig cafe, a book cafe, and even a cat cafe. But none of these options were viable due to the size of the business. And Hollis had realized that people use carryout services and delivery services.
Can you tell us more about these carry-out services?
Yes. To get them in time was not cost prohibitive for us, and the size of the restaurant could not easily accommodate the foot traffic that would be come from a delivery service.
Can you tell us about the investments Fitzpatrick's made before the pandemic?
Yes. Hollis added a projector bundle for sports events, a self-serve ice cream sundae bar, and a couple of pinball machines for the kids.
In your expert opinion, how did these investments get affected by the pandemic?
The pandemic restrictions wiped out any hope of us paying off the loans that we had taken out, and we were completely blindsided by this.
How was Fitzpatrick's doing financially before COVID-19 restrictions?
Normally business trends were somewhere between full and two-third capacity, so profit margins were around 3.5%.
How much revenue did Fitzpatrick's make?
Around 575,000 in 2019.
How did the pandemic affect these profits?
With the restrictions, the daily revenue reduced to about $458, so Fitzpatrick's was losing $730 every single day.
What is your opinion on hired at Fitzpatrick's?
In my opinion, hiring me was a very good business decision for Fitzpatrick's. They stuck with their tried and true greasy spoon menu, but with the exception of a couple changes, we were able to turn a modest profit.
In your expert opinion, was there any way to keep Fitzpatrick's open?
We were operating at a loss, and there was no way to keep Fitzpatrick's open, so we had them closed.
In your expert opinion, was Fitzpatrick's going to survive without the restrictions of the pandemic?
I believe that the numbers would have stayed the same pre-COVID or maybe even improved, and I have no reason to believe otherwise.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Cross-examine Ms. Anderson.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Anderson.
Hey.
You are a good friend of Fitzpatrick's, right?
Not before I met him.
But you are right now.
Yeah, I guess.
And you are also her accountant.
Yes.
And you were also related to her by marriage.
Yes.
So you would want her to succeed in this trial, yes?
I mean, I guess, yeah.
You have a stake in her winning this trial.
Yes.
Fitzpatrick's restaurant before the pandemic had barely been profitable.
They were making a profit.
But you've said that like it brought in enough to keep the lights on and gave Hollis some extra cash, but no more. Yes?
Yeah. Yes.
And you called it's definitely not a cash cow, correct?
Well, no, but it was still making profit.
Fitzpatrick took out 2 large loans during the pandemic, yes?
Yes.
From the government, yes?
Yes.
For a total of $250,000, correct?
Right. Yes.
And this would have been a total of half your yearly revenue in 2012.
That was a long time ago, but yes.
And so right now your yearly revenue is $575,000, correct?
In 2019, yes.
So the loan that Fitzpatrick took out from the government was more than half, was almost half of your yearly revenue, correct?
Yes.
And your restaurant was also open for 2 months of the year, January and February of 2020, which also earned you some revenue, correct?
Yes.
And even with all of this, you still went out of business.
Yes.
The amount of revenue for your foods before the pandemic was about 35% of your revenue, correct?
Correct.
And you only reduced that to 30% during the pandemic.
Right.
So instead of with a loss of at least half of your customers, as you said, wouldn't you reduce the food cost by more?
Can you repeat the question?
You said that the regulations have prevented you from having full occupancy, correct?
Correct.
So but the food cost only went down from 35% to 30%.
Right.
So you didn't reduce the amount of food that you were buying by that much.
Right.
To adapt, you got a high schooler to build a website, correct?
Yes.
And when it didn't work, you just gave up on the idea of a website. Yes?
Yeah, I guess.
Fitzpatrick's has always been resistant to change, right?
Yes. She wanted to stay traditional, where it's a family legacy.
And sometimes her resistance was to the detriment of the restaurant, correct?
I'm not sure.
Well, Hollis once dug her heels in about keeping prices low, thus resulting in decreasing profit margins.
Right.
And finally, you personally believe the governor was making what they thought was the right decision for the citizens, correct?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. She's asking the witness to speculate.
May I respond?
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm simply asking for their personal opinion on the actions of the government.
I'll let her testify, Mr. McGuire. Overruled. It's going to be based on her opinion. I think it'll be helpful to the overall testimony.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Would you like me to restate the question?
Yes, please.
You personally believe the governor was making what they thought was the right decision for their citizens, correct?
I'm not sure. I guess, but where's the line? Where do you draw the line between ruining people or someone's family legacy
And keeping citizens safe.
Right.
But to be clear, you believe that the governor was making what they thought was the right decision?
Well, not for businesses,
But for their citizens.
I guess.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect to Ms. Anderson.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Ms. Anderson, was there a struggle to balance your personal life and work life?
No, not at all.
So you're saying that though you did have a good relationship with Hollis Fitzpatrick, that doesn't affect anything with your work on doing the numbers and stuff like that?
No. I am very professional in the workforce.
Okay. So the investments Fitzpatrick made, were those expectations, were they able to be met due to the pandemic?
Definitely
Objection?
not.
What's the basis for your objection, Ms. Barucha?
The scope of inquiry. During cross, the investments were never brought up, and this is redirect.
I think that's true, Mr. McGuire. The Ohio rules changed, but the mock trial rule, I think, still says redirect has to be limited to the scope of cross. Why don't you move on to your next question? I'm going to sustain that objection.
Thank
No
you.
further questions, Your Honor.
Very good. Any recross?
Just a short one. May I proceed?
Please.
So, but would you say that you have any stake in Fitzpatrick's winning this case?
Can you restate the question?
Do you have any stake in Fitzpatrick's winning this case?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
You have a bias towards Fitzpatrick, right? Because they're your friend, your accountant, and you're related to them.
I wouldn't say I'm biased, no.
But you will be benefited if they win this case. Yes.
I guess.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. You may step down. Does the relator have any additional witnesses?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, in that case, respondent can call their first witness.
We would like to call Aspen Bennett to the stand.
Whenever you're ready, counsel.
Please state your name for the court.
My name is Aspen Bennett.
And what is your occupation, Ms. Bennett?
Right now, I'm a server at Harmony Bistro.
Do you know Hollis Fitzpatrick?
I do. I used to work at their restaurant Fitzpatrick's for around 6 years.
And what was Miss Fitzpatrick like?
Well, I really liked working for her. I mean, the restaurant had a great family feel, but overall, the place was a mess.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, the physical space was falling apart, from plumbing leaks to sketchy electrical work. The food was pretty unsanitary too. I was always super worried it would make someone sick. I never ate it. And new customers used to be put off by this. They never really came back.
Objection, Your Honor. Narrative.
Overruled.
Would you like me to restate the question?
Sure.
What did you mean when you said that the place was a mess?
Well, like I said, the physical space was falling apart. Hollis was super into these DIY repairs. There was plumbing leaks, sketchy electrical work. The food was pretty unsanitary.
Did you ever bring your issues up with Hollis?
Well, yeah, obviously I brought it up with Hollis, but they told me that it just couldn't be fixed. There wasn't enough money.
And how did these financial troubles of the restaurant manifest for you?
Well, Hollis had actually filed for bankruptcy a few years earlier, and the average table was barely spending $20. I mean, payday was super stressful. We used to always seem to get paid late, or sometimes from his own personal checks instead of like proper paychecks. Between that and the DIY repairs, it seemed pretty clear that Hollis wasn't making a lot of money.
It must have been really hard for you. What was the clientele at Fitzpatrick's like?
Mostly an older crowd. We never really seemed to get a lot of new customers, and it was more of a hangout space than a restaurant. People would sit for a long time, never buy a lot of food, spend a lot of money.
So what was the typical time that like customers came in?
Well, Fitzpatrick's was pretty dead by around 5:30. Most of the employees went home by then anyway. Sometimes Hollis would have me stand out on the street, try to drum up some business.
What happened when the pandemic hit?
Well, a lot of restaurants in Harmony around the country stayed open by using delivery services or walk-up windows. I offered to Hollis that we should use door delivery or Ultra Eats. It seemed like a no-brainer since these were already really popular delivery services in Harmony.
And how did Hollis respond to your suggestions?
She immediately dismissed my idea and instead told me that they decided to only take orders over the phone. It basically meant losing money unnecessarily. I couldn't understand it.
So what did you do?
Well, I then offered to spread the word about Fitzpatrick's on my own social media accounts or even create and operate Fitzpatrick's accounts for free, but again, she refused.
Did you try to help in any other way?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I liked working there. I really wanted to help. I offered the idea of bagged lunches or maybe making the hostess stand a little makeshift no cost takeout window, but none of my ideas or offers of free help were good enough for Hollis.
So how did you guys ever start running the business again?
Well, after a while, Governor DeBeer finally announced that restaurants could open for in-person but outdoor seating. Hollis told me that they had no idea or plan for opening up outdoor seating. I was shocked. Apparently, there just wasn't enough space.
Did you make any suggestions for where there could be outdoor seating?
Well, I suggested to Hollis that he should clean up the back alley, which is where the employees take their breaks. He refused, or she refused. It was a shock. I mean, other restaurants were using anything they had, every inch of space, even parking spots. But once again, nothing was good enough for Hollis.
So the restaurant remained closed.
Well, no, on May 21st, we were allowed to open for indoor seating with some restrictions like limited capacity, earlier closing time. The earlier closing time actually never really bothered me. I mean, like I said, the restaurant was pretty dead by 5:30 anyway.
So what were the ways that Hollis adapted to the capacity restrictions?
Well, she actually became pretty petty about it. I mean, seemed to be going out of her way to show that there were no way she could adapt to these restrictions. Like, obviously, there are other ways we could have rearranged the tables, but she was adamant about keeping the original configuration. We could have substituted bigger tables for smaller ones, but again, she chose not to.
So what happened to you during all of this?
Well, eventually Hollis had to lay off all non-family members, but she kept me working there just because I'd been there for a long time.
And what was your relationship with Hollis like?
Like I said, he kept me employed when he had to lay off everyone else and during the pandemic. I was really grateful. Previously, I had worked at a different restaurant in Harmony called Antonio's. The work environment there was way worse than Fitzpatrick, so I was super excited to work for them. I just feel like I was blinded by all the positives and my excitement, never really saw the negatives, how much of a mess it really was.
Did things ever sour between you and Hollis?
Well, yeah, she accused me of stealing. That was the biggest shock, considering that I had been one of their longest employees. Personally, I thought we were pretty close. I mean, in all my 6 years of working there, we had never had any problems. And since he kept me employed while he had to fire everyone else, I thought that we were on good terms. But I guess I was wrong. And in the end, the accusation was my last straw.
So what did you do next?
Well, like I said, by September, I had just had enough. Hollis continued to refuse to adapt. Business was getting worse. I mean, we just couldn't compete with other restaurants with owners who had senses of self-preservation, you know? My paychecks got smaller, tips were dwindling, business was getting slower. I quit.
Did you find a new place of work?
Well, yeah, I couldn't be out of a job, so I applied and got a job serving at Harmony Bistro where I work now.
And what is Harmony Bistro like?
Hands down, it has to be the best restaurant I've ever worked in. We use door delivery. We have a takeout stand set up just outside the restaurant to keep capacity under control. We've opened up the back alley for outdoor seating. We put some fairy lights out there. It's super welcoming, cozy. We've just really adapted well to these restrictions.
Overall, how would you assess your experience working for Fitzpatrick's?
Well, in the end, like I said, I loved working for Hollis. When the pandemic came, I was so grateful that they kept me employed. Unfortunately, Hollis was just too stubborn to change, and the restaurant did close down. Restaurants aren't really the safest place anyway. I mean, you're always in really close contact with people. Customers will come in when they're sick. Employees will come in when they're sick. We can't afford to lose a day of income. In the end, I'm just the most grateful that we kept everyone safe during the time.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examine Ms. Bennett.
Yes, Your Honor. Can you restate your name for the court?
My name is Aspen Bennett.
And you said you worked somewhere else before Fitzpatrick. Can you restate what that was, where that was?
Yeah, I worked at a different restaurant in Harmony called Antonio's, another little family-run business.
And could you tell us why you stopped working there?
Oh, it's a crazy story. So the way that Antonio's worked, it was the employees were always told to just get their tip money out of the register, you know, get your paychecks because it was kind of a mess, like I said. I was getting my money out of the register. And then a couple of days later, I hear that I'm being accused of stealing $200. It was crazy, and I don't work there anymore.
So what happened after you were accused of stealing?
Well, like I said, I no longer work there. I got a new job working for Hollis at
Is that
Fitzpatrick.
because you were accused of stealing?
Yes, that is why I don't work there anymore.
And when you're accused of stealing, did you go to court?
Well, yeah, so I got a call from the police. I was taken down to the station, but I was fired and nothing came out of it. I had a charge, but nothing super serious.
So you went to court for stealing and you pled guilty, is that correct?
I mean, yeah, my parents, my family just really wanted this to be over with. I
You
couldn't
did
really
plead guilty.
afford the process, so I did plead guilty.
And isn't it true that you worked at Fitzpatrick sick on multiple occasions because you couldn't afford work?
Like I said, sometimes employees came in when we're sick. I mean, it's really detrimental to lose that whole day of income.
And is that why you were accused of stealing at Hollis's? Is that why Hollis accused you of stealing? Because you couldn't afford, because you didn't have the money to afford certain living expenses?
Not at all. Like I said, the accusation from Hollis came out of the blue. I had no clue that he was going to do that. Like I said, I thought we were really close.
So let me reiterate. So you were accused of stealing on 2 different occasions. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've been falsely accused.
But you pled guilty to one of those.
Like I said, I didn't have the money to do a whole thing. My
that's-
family wanted it gone. I did plead guilty.
Okay, thank you. And you claim that you quit Hollis's restaurant. Is that correct?
I quit. I want to make it very clear. I did quit at Fitzpatrick's. I wasn't fired.
But are you aware that Hollis claims that you were fired?
Well, that's false. I quit.
But wouldn't the owner of the restaurant know what at the end of the day, what she did to their employees?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
Mr. Santos?
Your Honor, with this line of questioning, I'm trying to show the liability of this witness.
May I respond?
Yes, go ahead.
Your Honor, this is not relevant by definition, as it does not go to any of the main 3 prongs in Penn Central, which is what this case is about.
Sustained, Mr. Santos. Why don't you move to your next question?
Thank you, Your Honor. So is it true that you enjoy gossip?
I mean, I enjoy the family feel. I like knowing what's going on.
So is it possible to say that you're trying to stir the pot by claiming that you quit Fitzpatrick instead of being fired?
Not at all. I'm being very truthful. I did quit.
Is it true that you understood that Hollis was struggling?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was clear that the business was struggling.
And isn't it true that the business took a hit after the governor's restrictions?
That is correct, but we were struggling well before that as well.
And were you surprised by how the business suffered after the restrictions were in place?
I mean, not really. Like I said, we were already barely breaking even, and Hollis was doing a lot of DIY repairs. He didn't have a lot of money, so I knew we would take a hit.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, anything further for this witness?
No redirect, Your Honor.
Very good, Ms. Bennett, you may step down. Respondent, do you have additional witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. The respondents would like to call Dr. Ellis Mazakis to the stand. May I proceed?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Please state your name for the court.
My name is Dr. Ellis Mazakis.
Dr. Mazakis, what do you do for a living?
So I'm the Buckeye Director of Health and Human Services. I've been serving as director for about 7 years, but I've been working at the Department of Health and Human Services for about 20 years.
What does your job as director entail?
So as director, my primary responsibilities are to oversee and partake in the development of various public health policies, to enforce the mission of the department, and to collaborate with other team members in the process.
How did you get to your role as director?
So I kind of had to work my way up the ranks. I was a public health sanitarian before becoming director after I graduated school in 1994. And while gaining practical experience in the Buckeye Health Department, I was simultaneously working on my master's and my MD from the Buckeye State University.
What did you get your MD in?
So I knew ever since I was little that I wanted to be a doctor. And when the time finally came to get my degree, I got an MD, a medical doctor, and I had an emphasis in epidemiology and within that.
What did you get your bachelor's degree in?
So my bachelor's degree was in health services, and that was from the University of Arizona in 1994.
Your Honor, at this point in time, I would like to respectfully move under Rule 702 to qualify Dr. Mazakis as an expert in public health, health services, and epidemiology.
Any objection by the leader?
Objection, Your Honor. This witness currently has an investigation undergoing, crediting their reliability, and under Rule 608, they cannot be trusted as an expert witness.
I think go ahead, Ms. Papakert.
Dr. Mazakis is definitely qualified to be an expert witness as she has specialized knowledge, training, skill, and experience regarding public health and epidemiology.
Mr. McGuire, I'm going to let you address it on cross-examination. If you want to do that, that'll be fine, but I'm going to overrule the objection and acknowledge her as an expert for now.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. You mentioned previously that your job as director is to enforce the mission of the department. What is the department's mission?
So the department's mission is to enhance and protect the well-being of all citizens of Buckeye first and foremost by providing effective health and human services, fostering advances in medicine and in public health services.
What does the Department of Health and Human Services do to fulfill its mission?
So some of our responsibilities include drafting policy and other restrictions related to health and human services in the safety of the public in Buckeye. And this definitely includes responding to emergency health situations, such as the breakout of the global pandemic.
What kind of establishments are affected by your policies?
We really want to sort of cover all bases and include any establishment where the services we provide may be able to protect patrons from possible public health risks. In a global pandemic, for example, we really wanted to take extra care and caution in ensuring that each and every establishment under our jurisdiction is properly taken into consideration.
Does this include restaurants?
Definitely. One of the department's main responsibilities is to oversee health regulations of restaurants and ensure that restaurants abide by the proper provisions, safety standards. These regulations are updated every 4 years to continuously reflect the latest scientific understanding of foodborne illnesses and to provide the best industry practices for keeping restaurant goers safe. I would say that this is definitely one of our stricter regulated industries.
Previously, you mentioned that the department responds to public health emergencies. How did the department respond to the outbreak of COVID-19?
So we kind of worked in tandem with Governor DeBeer. In March 2020, Governor DeBeer, based on our guidance, issued a stay-at-home order on a temporary basis, with the exceptions of essential workers and essential businesses.
Besides this stay-at-home order, were there any other executive orders?
Yeah, we posted them on the department's webpage.
Would you recognize this webpage if I showed it to you?
Definitely.
Your Honor, I would like to introduce a copy of Exhibit B. Let the record reflect I am presenting opposing counsel with a clean and unmarked copy.
That's fine. Relator, are you able to see it?
Sorry, one second.
Yes, Your Honor, we can see.
Great.
Ms. Mazakis, what is this?
So this is a timeline of the executive orders clearly stated on the Buckeye Department of Health and Human Services public website. As you can see, on March 15th, 2020, Governor DeBeer ordered to close restaurants, bars, banquet facilities for dine-in services. And just a little over 2 months later, or about 2 months later, there was a reopening order with new regulations to ensure public safety.
What were the reasons for these regulations?
It was due to the highly contagious nature of COVID-19. You know, at the time we implemented these precautions, our understanding of the virus was that it was easily spread between individuals as a result of proximity and touch, as an airborne virus. So we really just wanted to be as thorough and as safe as possible.
Why restaurants specifically?
Well, restaurants are sort of a hotspot for something like a virus to spread. We have many families sort of sitting in close proximity to each other. You're bringing things to your mouths, you're salivating, you're masticating, and it just really is the prime sort of transmitter. It was a prime way of transmitting illnesses.
Did the regulations ever change?
Yes, as our understanding of COVID grew, we really just wanted to be more adaptable and sort of reflect what we knew about the virus at the time. So, it is always better to err on the side of caution. And I think with that based in mind, these regulations with what we knew at the time were pretty reasonable. And, we just wanted to remain reasonable as our knowledge grew.
What were these regulations?
So in May 2020, restaurants were permitted to open outdoor dining, and a week later, restaurants could open indoor dining if they followed certain guidelines.
What were these guidelines?
So some of the things included every table must be 6 feet apart. There must be plexiglass installed between the tables at the counter. They must be reduced to 50% capacity, including staff and customers. And there were also mask mandates that were put in place. And this really just was to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and sort of prevent as much harm that the virus could incur as possible.
How did you decide on these specific regulations and guidelines?
So we really wanted to kind of find a middle ground between the scientific safety aspect and the business aspect. So we worked with many local restaurant owners to determine what regulations would be the least burdensome on restaurant operations, but we're still able to protect public health. But of course, we are the Department of Public Health and Safety, and so public health and safety was the top priority.
How did you help restaurants comply with the regulations?
So one of the things that we did was we issued a memo which included recommendations to comply with the regulations, such as how to obtain plexiglass, how to develop a virtual menu, and ways to maximize seating arrangements in small places.
Did you ever create an exemption process in which restaurants could be exempted from the restrictions?
Initially, no, we did not. In fact, Hollis Fitzpatrick had actually requested exemptions from restrictions very early on in the timeline, but at the time it just wasn't feasible or fair. And not only did we not have a structure in place to process these types of requests, it also just wasn't safe to lift restrictions that early in the reopening timeline. With the little data we had, we really just needed more information, and the plan was always to evaluate at a later time.
Did you ever reevaluate?
Yeah, we're constantly reevaluating. The health department later created an exemption application for businesses that could operate safely. The keyword is safely without the regulations. Any exemptions were to be issued on a case-by-case basis, and we really just made these decisions based on the perspective of public health first and foremost.
Did Ms. Fitzpatrick apply for one of the exemptions?
Yes, she did, and we notified her that we need more information. The application just wasn't complete, but unfortunately, we never heard anything back from her.
Was there any negative feedback from the regulations?
Yeah, so apparently the ethics committee at the department received an anonymous tip that I was allowing health inspectors to quote unquote take bribes from restaurant owners to look the other way. I can assure you, that never happened. I did come from a medical degree, and there are countless stories of malpractice, but most likely those are just disgruntled individuals and sort of not willing to understand the perspective that we came from protecting public health first and foremost. It wasn't a business move, it was a public health move.
Based on your background, experience, and education in public health, health services, and epidemiology, Do you have an opinion to reasonable degree of certainty of the necessity of the government's actions?
Yes, I am pretty certain.
What is your opinion?
So these regulations, first and foremost, for a harm preventing purpose, they were for the protection of the people of Buckeye in this epidemic. The department has done all they can to provide additional help to restaurants to ensure they understood what was required of them and sort of to ease the transition into this new normal. We understood that the regulations would be a shock to some residents, but this action was out of necessity. It was out of concern for public health and the safety of Buckeye citizens. COVID-19 is a highly contagious virus. It's very deadly. So, that prevention of death was our first and foremost goal.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Sorry, I had myself muted. Cross-examine Ms. Matsakis, Mr. McGuire.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes.
Can you restate your name for the court?
My name is Dr. Ellis Mazakis.
You are the Buckeye Director of Health.
Health and Human Services, yes.
Okay. May I present a clean and unmarked copy of Exhibit C?
Yes, as long as Respondent's Counsel has one.
No
All
objection,
right.
Your Honor.
Hold on a second, pulling it up. That's not it. Nope, that's really not it. Okay, that needs to move. Okay, it's right in line. Oh, there we go. Oh, nope, wrong one, wrong one. There we go. All right, we got it. All right. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, so I can identify this document as Buckeye Governor's Order reopening restaurants, and this is a detailed guideline of the regulations that we put into place so that the state of Buckeye could safely reopen, again with the public health, concern for public health first and foremost in mind.
Okay, thank you. Is that your name on this plan?
Sorry, I don't. Yes, under the state of Buckeye, the big logo that says Buckeye, Department of Health and Human Services, under Fran DeBeer Governor is my name, Director of Buckeye Health and Human Services, Ellis Mazakis.
Okay, so you're saying that the governor, Fran DeBeer, also had input on these restrictions?
I'm saying we worked in tandem. The governor really has the government has a more sort of overhead job, and we were consulting him.
So that is a yes.
I would say we worked in tandem.
All right. Okay. Stop share. All right. So are you aware of the impact of the restrictions placed on restaurants is such that businesses with larger physical spaces are not as negatively impacted?
I would like further elaboration on what specifically you mean by negatively impacted.
They didn't have they had an advantage over smaller businesses or smaller spaces.
I wouldn't say they had an advantage. I would say that they were held to the same regulations. The regulations were the same for everyone.
At this time, I would like to share a copy of the witness's witness statement.
Sure, you could present that to her.
Let the record show it is marked.
Sure, you could present that to her.
All right, that is not it. I'm struggling here. All right. Okay, so please read the sentence starting right here on 142, and then it ends on line 143.
Right, so it says specifically there are some restaurants and other businesses in large enough spaces that the capacity and distancing restrictions were no longer necessary. Again, there is nothing in that sentence that says businesses in larger spaces were granted an advantage. I am coming from the perspective of a health and human services director working first and foremost for public health. in my perspective, we are giving the same fair regulations to each and every business. How each business responds
You
to those
said, you said in that statement, though, that the larger businesses, it was no longer necessary for them to follow the guidelines. So how is that not favoring a larger business?
Well, if you look on line 145, it says, for example, we looked for businesses with significant ventilation and airflow. If we come from the perspective of someone who is working towards Health and Human Services of an airborne virus, that significant ventilation would help the larger business, would help the businesses and larger spaces work under these regulations. But I come from med school. I would like to use an analogy that I heard in med school. If you have a doctor with 10 years of experience and a doctor with 3 years of experience, they have the.
But you said, though, you did say, even though it is saying that you did say that it was the ventilation, that still gives certain businesses an advantage that other businesses do not have. Like
Attorney
Fitzpatrick,
McGuire,
for example,
if you
does
could
not
let
have
me finish my
advantage
statement.
that a larger business has.
Attorney McGuire, if you would let me finish my statement, I would like to use an analogy that I heard in med school. Say you have a doctor of 10 years of experience and you have a doctor of 3 years experience, and they are given 2 patients that are under the same condition and they need to undergo treatment. They give the same treatment and the patient under the doctor of the 10 years of experience does not die, and the patient under the doctor with 3 years experience does die. Sure, the doctor with 10 years of experience had an advantage, they had more capability, but this is not about the personal context of the doctor. This is about not killing people. You're held to the same standard, whether or not your personal contacts, because it's not about your job, it is about making sure people not die. And that doesn't mean that we are discriminating against the doctor with 3 years of experience. That just means they're held to the same standard.
Can we please move on back to the questions instead of getting this narrative?
Well, I am giving an answer to your, I am giving it,
Gone well beyond the scope of the question.
Why don't you restate? You can move to strike counsel if you want. If not, go ahead and move to your next question.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. Okay. So how can we claim these restrictions are fair if the ventilation is a factor with larger businesses having better ventilation and able to not have to follow the restrictions as harshly as, let's say, a smaller business like Fitzpatrick's? How
Objection.
can that be?
Can you repeat your objection, Ms. Papaker?
Objection for asked and answered. Dr. Ellis has clearly explained that there is no advantage to certain restaurants and that the regulations apply to all restaurants.
May I
Ellis.
respond, Your Honor?
Go ahead, yes.
It stated directly in her witness statement that she felt that larger spaces could work around the restrictions because of their ventilation.
That's true, but we have covered this in some detail. If you want to restate the question, that'll be fine. I'm going to sustain Ms. Papaker's objection. I thought the question was a bit hard to understand. Put it a different way and I'll let you proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So airflow has a impact on what would allow, airflow has a impact on how restaurants can follow the restrictions, correct?
Airflow has an impact on how each individual restaurant can respond to the restrictions, but that doesn't mean that we can hold different restaurants to different standards, because if we do that, that means
I just say yes or no.
It's not that simple. It's not as simple as a yes or no answer. If we were to hold different restaurants to different standards, that means the patrons of the restaurants.
I need a yes or no, though.
Well, again, it's not that simple.
Well, make it that simple, yes or no.
Again, it's not. If we were to hold specific restaurants to a lower standard, the patrons of those restaurants would be at higher risk, and that is against the mission of the Buckeye Public Health Department.
Okay, I'll move on. The Buckeye Health Department allowed for exemptions. Is this correct?
Specific case-by-case exemptions, again, coming to the perspective of public health, not from a business standpoint.
Just yes or no? They did? allow it, correct?
Exemptions from a public health standpoint.
Okay. When did these become available?
These became available a few months down the line after the initial restrictions were put into place.
Does November 2nd, 2020 sound familiar?
Yes, that's about the date.
All right. Did Hollis Fitzpatrick ever submit a request?
Yes, but again, she did not provide enough information that her exemptions would be able to still protect the public health of the patrons of her restaurant.
But she did submit a request, correct?
Yes, but again, it did not contain sufficient information.
How long were the responses typically?
We were overwhelmed with a number of applications, and we just worked around the clock to try and get back as quickly as possible. So we got back to Mrs. Fitzpatrick as quickly as we could.
Okay. Were you aware that a movie set received an exemption before the exemptions were allowed?
Objection.
What's your objection, Ms. Papenberg? You spoke at the same time. I couldn't hear it.
I apologize. I withdraw.
Very good.
Sorry, may you repeat the question?
Yes. Are you aware that a movie set received an exemption before the exemption process was supposedly in place?
Yes, that is true, but I'm not involved in the film industry.
Okay. What is considered a failing grade in a health inspection?
A C- rating, and that is when a restaurant has gone to such a degraded level below optimal health.
So you're saying C minus?
Sorry?
You're saying a C minus is the lowest grade, is the failing grade?
A C- and below is when it caused for serious concern.
Okay. So Fitzpatrick's got a B minus on their last health inspection, right?
Yes, and I would say that is fairly low grade.
But they passed, correct?
They passed, but that doesn't mean it was optimal.
But they did, so that's what matters. Is it true that you're being questioned about cheating the health code or cheating health inspections?
No, I'm being questioned for quote unquote taking bribe from health inspectors. That is not exactly the same thing. Or taking bribes.
But that is cheating the health inspection, though. If you're taking a bribe to look away for a few things, that is technically cheating the inspection.
That is what I've been accused of, but again, that is not what happened. I'm sure it is just some disgruntled individual who is unhealthy with the regulations for public safety that have been put into place.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you. Any redirect of Ms. Mazakis?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Mazakis, do you hold all restaurants to the same standards regarding the health code?
Yes, clearly, because if all restaurants are not being held to the same standards, that means the restaurants that are being held to lower standards, such as Fitzpatrick's is requesting, pose a higher risk for their patrons, and therefore those patrons have a higher likelihood of death and being subject to the extreme consequences of the pandemic.
Does a B- health code provide any concerns for the health department?
It provides some pretty grave concerns. I believe Hollis specifically was dinged for inadequate hand washing, which is pretty serious considering the staff members of that establishment should be cooking and making things with their hands to be consumed. Other pieces that could lead to a B- rating are rat and vermin infestations. I believe Fitzpatrick was also dinged for not using registered food suppliers.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any recross?
Yes, Your Honor. Fitzpatrick passed their health inspection with a B- rating, correct?
Yes, but that doesn't mean that the establishment was completely healthy or optimal.
Well, Ms.
Right.
Mazakis, it was a yes, no. That one was a pretty simple yes, no question. Just
Right.
confine your answer to the questioner's inquiry.
Then yes, they did pass.
All right. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bazakis. You may step down.
Thank you.
Does the respondent have any additional witnesses?
No, Your Honor, the respondents rest.
Okay, in that case, let's take our 2-minute intermission to prepare for closing statements. If the bailiff timekeepers would please track the 2 minutes for us and give us a signal when we're ready to go, we'll reconvene in about 2 minutes. Okay, let's begin. The judge needs 10 seconds. I'll be right back. Okay, trying to eliminate sources of noise pollution. Is relator ready to begin with closing statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may
Can I
begin.
proceed?
Yes.
Your Honor, my name is Braden McGuire, here representing Hollis Fitzpatrick, along with my co-counsel, John Santos. The Supreme Court established that a taking is a taking, no matter how big or small it is. As we established, the small local family business of Fitzpatrick's was a victim of a taking and received no financial compensation for their loss. The governor, Fran DeBeer, did not establish fair restrictions that allowed for all business types to succeed. Governor DeBeer did not factor in the space that businesses had to work with, and by doing so, discriminate against many small businesses that didn't have the resources to accommodate these restrictions. Even Buckeye's health director stated that larger spaces did have an advantage. As we have established, this is not a hearing about how Hollis Fitzpatrick was as a business owner, but it is to see if there were any issues with the restrictions put in place. Your Honor, the opposing side has argued that Hollis Fitzpatrick was a poor business owner and was the cause of their own collapse. This, again, Your Honor, is not what this case is here to judge. We are here to determine whether or not there was a taking. We have provided facts that support Hollis Fitzpatrick was indeed the victim of a taking. The opposing counsel will argue that these restrictions were equal, which is true, but in this case, equal isn't necessarily fair to everyone. The business of Fitzpatrick's succeeded and was able to pull a profit before the restrictions were put in place, and attempted several adaptations to the times to allow their business to survive. None of these attempts were successful. The evidence presented by Hollis Fitzpatrick themselves helps prove that there was no way that their space could accommodate the restrictions. Fitzpatrick shared this along with other personal struggles during this tough time and how these things led to the fall of Fitzpatrick's. The evidence presented by Phoenix Anderson shows that Fitzpatrick's went from a profiting small business to business forced to close due to a lack of resources to allow them to adapt to the restrictions. Anderson also gave us an inside view of Fitzpatrick's and how they tried to adapt to the time, but none of these attempts were successful. Again, this is not a case to judge Hollis Fitzpatrick's business practices, but a case to determine if there was a taking. Hollis Fitzpatrick was indeed taken from as her business's value depleted due to restrictions put in place that were impossible for business the size of hers to succeed. A taking is a taking, no matter how big or small it is, and every taking deserves fair compensation. In conclusion, Your Honor, Hollis Fitzpatrick was the victim of a government taking. A taking is a taking, no matter how big or small it is. The information is all out on the table, and it is now time for this court to make the right decision. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Ms. Barucha?
May it please the court. The government cannot be blamed for shoddy business practices. The Relator's restaurant has always been barely profitable, with dangerous health code violations and little table turnover. Then in early 2020, the world changed. To protect the lives of all the people of Buckeye, the government leapt into action. Governor DeBeer announced that to combat the virus, the shutdown of coronavirus hotspots, including restaurants, was necessary. As the global understanding of the coronavirus deepened, the regulations were changed to allow for outdoor eating and indoor dining. Many restaurants were adaptable and worked with the government regulations to protect their customers and still stayed in business. However, Fitzpatrick's own management let his restaurant slip away. He did not open up a website, allow for online orders. He did not join up with any delivery app. He did not even open up outdoor dining. Now, as the relator, Fitzpatrick's claims that it was government regulation that led him to going out of business instead of his inability to run his own business. The relator is wrong. The relator holds the burden of proof in this case. They must prove with a preponderance of the evidence that a partial regulatory taking under Penn Central has occurred. However, the relators have not made their burden. Instead, the state of Buckeye has clearly shown that all three Penn Central factors weigh against the finding. On the first factor, economic impact, you have heard ample evidence that Fitzpatrick's was a struggling business even before the restrictions. The relator has offered no proof that without the restrictions, but with COVID-19, Fitzpatrick's would have saved any money, thereby making all their evidence unnecessary using lost net income method. Fitzpatrick's and Aspen have both testified to the low amount of profit that Fitzpatrick's had been making before the pandemic. There was also low turnover during when people would come and eat there. Additionally, Fitzpatrick's had a very bad health grade, and anything much lower, and they would have been shut down already. Lastly, Fitzpatrick's barely tried to make his restaurant profitable during the pandemic. He didn't raise prices, he didn't try website or delivery apps, he didn't open up outdoor seatings. Aspen has testified to how these were all possible additions that Fitzpatrick's did not try. Finally, as Ms. Anderson stated, the government had helped Fitzpatrick's, providing them with a loan of $250,000. That is almost half of their yearly revenue. It becomes clear that it was bad management and bad luck that closed down Fitzpatrick's and not the pandemic regulations. Therefore, the first pillar of Penn Central weighs in favor of the respondents. The second pillar, interference with distinct investor-backed expectations. We have heard evidence from the Buckeye Director of Health that restaurants are an extremely heavily regulated industry. As AWMS says, reasonable investor-backed expectations are greatly reduced in a highly regulated field. The respondent is not claiming that Fitzpatrick's could have predicted this pandemic. No one is. However, the relator could have reasonably anticipated the possibility of such regulations, given the previous state of them, as most of these additional pandemic regulations were about hand washing and people's limit, which are just continuations of previous regulations. Therefore, the second factor also weighs in favor of the respondents. The third factor, the character of government action. Even if you ignore the previous two factors, the character of government action weighs so heavily in favor of the respondent, the takings claim still falls apart. These regulations affected all restaurants and did not single out Fitzpatrick's in any way. What my opposing counsel failed to point out to you is that these regulations are all about safety. The regulations were not made to impact all restaurants equally profit-wise, but to make all restaurants equally safe. That is the true equality and fairness of the government actions. Ms. Mazakis has clearly testified to the immediate danger of COVID-19 and the necessity and the success of these pandemic restrictions. And the relator has offered no proof that this pandemic was anything less than an emergency. Therefore, the character of government action is beyond reproach in this case. A taking is a taking, no matter how small. But in this case, there was no taking. Our fifth domain, eminent domain clause, is meant to protect innocents from a cruel government snatching away property, not to be twisted to scapegoat the government and stop them from saving lives. The respondents have failed to meet their burden of proof, as all three Penn Central factors weigh heavily against finding a taking. Therefore, we respectfully ask that the court dismiss the relator's demand for writ of mandamus with prejudice. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Barucha. Okay, can the timekeepers let me know if there were any major discrepancies during timekeeping? Didn't look to me like there were. Okay, great. Let me read a brief statement. Does either team have serious reason to believe that a material, I'm sorry, Ms. Barucha, go ahead.
I believe the relator has a chance to make a rebuttal.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. I apologize. Thank you for reminding me of that. The judge jumped the gun. Mr. McGuire, go right ahead.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. Not in every case, this case is not about the business practices of Hollis Fitzpatrick. It is to determine whether or not there was a taking. If there were restrictions put in place that decreased the value of Fitzpatrick's restaurant. The restaurant was pulling a profit before the COVID-19 pandemic. And then once the pandemic hit, all profits were lost and they were pulling negative numbers. Equal isn't always fair. That is the case here. Sure, every restaurant and every business has very similar, or if not the same, guidelines. But not all those equal guidelines are fair for every situation. For example, as we have established today, larger restaurants and businesses didn't have to follow the guidelines as strictly because of better ventilation. That is not fair to the smaller businesses that still have to follow these guidelines and cannot adapt to make a way around these restrictions. Fitzpatrick's did pass their health examination. It wasn't the highest score, but it was still a passing score. No adaptations that Hollis Fitzpatrick attempted were able to succeed with her business environment. Your Honor, a taking is a taking, no matter how big or small it is. Hollis Fitzpatrick is a victim of a taking. It's up to this court to decide what is the right decision and prove that Hollis Fitzpatrick was indeed taken from. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. And I'm sorry again for cutting you off. I'm used to having people reserve time for rebuttal, but of course, under mock trial, you don't have to do that. So well done. Now I think we can move to my statement about post-trial objections. So let me read that. Does either team have serious reason to believe that a material violation of any rule has occurred during this trial? I will remain on the bench for 3 minutes, during which time any protest or objection may be brought to my attention by a team attorney. The team attorneys may communicate with any student team members involved in this particular trial, but may not communicate in any way with legal advisors, teachers, or anyone outside their performing team members in this trial. So if the bailiff and timekeepers will please keep track of the 3 minutes for us, we'll reconvene in 3 minutes, and you can let me know at that time if there are any post-trial objections. Thanks. I was just letting you know I saw the 1 minute indicator. Thanks. Okay. Are there any post-trial objections to be brought before the court? From
No,
relator? None from relator? I see a head shake. Any from respondent?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, I think that concludes our trial, unless I forgot anything else. So well done, everybody. Nice job. I'm going to turn it over to Lauren to give her comments first.
Hi, guys. I just want to say you all were so well prepared and very knowledgeable of the case. I know it's a lot of information you guys have to retain as attorneys, witnesses, everyone. So I think you all did a great job. Your cross exams were really great. And I liked all of the objections and responses. I think everyone objected really well and everyone responded really well. So you should all be really proud of yourselves. Congratulations.
Thanks, Lauren. I agree with that. Yeah, I'm really hard pressed to find much to criticize with this group. You all did a very, very good job. as a mock trial judge, you see lots of different levels of preparation, and all of you guys were very well prepared. I was very impressed. I don't have a whole lot of specific comments. You guys are already quite polished. A few suggestions: make sure you try to, and you guys are already doing this, make sure you get your eyes out of your notes as much as you can if you're an attorney, and really look at the audience and look into the camera. And it's harder to get the hang of this over Zoom than it is in a real courtroom. But the more you make eye contact, the more persuasive you are. And so that's something that all of us can always improve. I thought the objections were good. The examinations were good. The attorneys did a nice job too. I'm looking at my notes. I didn't take too many. I was trying to stay focused on the witness exams. I wrote a lot of great comments, and I have a lot of high scores down here. So well done, everybody. And it was really nice to get to watch you all, and thanks for letting me participate. Do you have any questions for Lauren or I before we adjourn?
No questions, but I would just like to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to help us. And I know the rest of my team would like to say the same. We really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you from our team as well. Thank
You're
you guys
very-
for your time. You guys sacrificed
You're
a lot
welcome.
of time.
You're very welcome. I'm sure your teachers put you up to that, but thanks anyway. We appreciate it. Good luck the rest of the way.
Thank you very much.
Take care.